The day I left my hometown remains etched in my mind. It was a brisk autumn morning, with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves hanging in the cool air. Everything I cared about was crammed into my beat-up old pickup truck, and I was resolute. I needed a fresh start, miles away from the agony of betrayal. Leaving wasn't a simple choice, but it was the only way forward. The lies and treachery I had endured had shattered my life, and putting distance between myself and the people responsible felt like the only path to healing. After hours on the road, I stumbled upon a sleepy, unassuming town that seemed tailor-made for a new beginning. The pace of life was unhurried, the locals radiated warmth, and the charm of the place drew me in. While exploring, I came across an old, run-down gas station and garage that had been languishing on the market for years. Spotting its hidden potential, I put in a lowball offer, and to my surprise, it was accepted. That little property became the cornerstone of my new life and the foundation for rebuilding my livelihood. One Saturday, I sat at my favorite corner in the local tavern, savoring the quiet. That place had become my sanctuary, a spot where I could unwind and reflect. Early on, I'd purchased the gas station and repair shop at a steal. The former owner had been desperate to sell after it sat vacant for 2 years, but I saw opportunity where others saw failure. My first big project was to add a retail store next to the gas station, catering to the town's needs after the only grocery store closed early in the evenings. I rearranged the fuel pumps to face the store, creating ample parking for customers. The store became a hub of activity, especially late at night. Open 24/7. It thrived between 7 p.m. and midnight, while the garage operated on a tight schedule from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays, with special projects reserved for Saturdays. At first, the bar down the street wasn't thrilled when I started stocking liquor, but the new income stream created jobs and helped the community in unexpected ways. Once I restructured the store's layout and merchandising, business boomed. A woman I hired to help manage the store played a critical role in its success. Before long, the equity loan was repaid, and demand forced me to double the staff to handle the weekend rush. On a typical Friday or Saturday night, we sold mountains of snacks to bar-goers, and on Sundays, customers flocked in for cold beer at unbeatable prices. That particular Saturday evening, I was nursing a double Sam Daniels on the rocks with a splash of water and a wedge of lemon. I just finished an 8-month project restoring a vintage truck, a family heirloom for one of my regulars. He swore he'd drive it until his last breath and joked about being buried in it. From 4 to 7, the bar was at its best, quiet enough to relax before the evening crowd rolled in. The regulars, mostly farmers, often brought their daughters for some post-dinner fun. In my 6.5 years here, I had built a solid reputation and a network of genuine friendships. The community had a way of looking out for one another, always keeping an eye on anything out of the ordinary. My weekly ritual was simple: one drink at the tavern every Saturday before heading home. But that evening, my peace shattered. As soon as I saw them walk in, my heart sank. The woman was my ex-wife's twin sister, and the young man beside her was the boy I once thought was my son. Memories I had tried so hard to bury came rushing back. Living with them had blinded me to their true nature. The boy, now grown, resembled his biological father more than ever, a bitter confirmation of the truth that had destroyed me. What could they possibly want now? I watched as they spoke to the bartender, showed him a photo, and left. Relief washed over me that my long, scruffy hair, beard, and slimmer build made me nearly unrecognizable. After a while, I discreetly sent a message: "Come home when I can." About 30 minutes later, the bartender, Tom, joined me at my table. "What were they after, Tom?" I asked. "They said a woman named Lena is dying of cancer and wants to make amends," he replied. "They claimed they'd heard you lived here and came to confirm the rumor. They asked for your picture, but I acted like I didn't recognize the name." I lit a cigarette, tore off the filter, and took a deep drag. "The woman's my ex's twin sister. The young man is the child my ex claimed was mine for years. Do you think they were being honest?" Tom thought for a moment before answering. "There's some truth in what they said, but I could tell they're hiding something big." I nodded. Deception had always been their weapon of choice. feigning sincerity while twisting the knife behind my back. As Tom returned to his post, my mind wandered back to nearly 7 years ago, the day I left everything behind. They never thought I'd follow through, mocking me as I walked out the door. They believed I was just angry over a prank, oblivious to the fact that I discovered our youngest child wasn't mine, but my brother-in-law's. That bombshell set everything in motion. A trusted family member, sick of the twins' schemes, provided the damning evidence. She called them black witches who thrived on pure malice. Earlier that week, I'd uncovered a new insurance policy they'd taken out on me. A $4 million payout for accidental deaths. A wise woman I confided in urged me to leave immediately. My work truck was already packed with the essentials, so I drove away without a backward glance. 2 states away, I started over. I blamed myself for some of it. I got Lena pregnant when she was young, and at 18, I caved to family pressure and married her. In quick succession, we had 2 more children. To her, it was all a game. After I left, she told our daughters, "Your father will come back when he regains his sense of humor." But when a sheriff arrived at her door with divorce papers, her laughter died. "Are you Mrs. Lena Frost?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, still smiling. "Then you've been served," he said, handing her the envelope. Her face fell as she realized I'd dissolved our marriage without a shred of hesitation. My attorney meticulously documented all our assets and debts, along with a DNA report that confirmed Lena's affair had lasted an entire year. The divorce petition detailed everything: receipts, photos from their hotel rendezvous, and other damning evidence. Enclosed in the same envelope was a letter revealing I was suing her husband for child support, infidelity, and defamation. Their smug laughter quickly faded. The joke, for once, wasn't on me. This time, I had the last laugh. For years, Lena and her sister had treated me as a cash machine, convinced everything I touched would turn to gold. Lena and the kids had always been spoiled, enjoying a life of luxury without lifting a finger. Later, she discovered that I had quietly sold 3 of our businesses, paid off every penny of debt, and even offloaded our 2 apartment buildings at a profit. I had canceled every credit card, pulled my name from our joint accounts, and signed over my share of the house to her. Half of our total net worth was now cash in my pocket, reducing her monthly income of $10,000 to zero. Did Lena's sister ever understand the true cost of trying to use me? I doubt it. My attorney froze all their assets before the subpoena was delivered, leaving them high and dry after the divorce proceedings. Still, my lawyer later gave Lena a quarter of their losses as reimbursement. When she asked him why, he said for him, this was never about the money. It was about principle. He hopes this will help you start over and learn from your mistakes. Despite everything, Lena refused to finalize the divorce without speaking to me first. This left us legally separated, but technically still married. I had no interest in talking to a woman who had lied to my face for years. Forced to earn her own living for the first time, Lena quickly learned how fast money disappears without a steady income. I made sure all my important mail was forwarded to a rented FedEx mailbox, which was then forwarded to my work address every week. I knew Lena and Nina too well. They thrived on manipulation and revenge. It was never a matter of if they would come after me, but when. Their family had a habit of holding grudges, and my disappearance would only fuel their anger. The longer I stayed away, the harsher their retaliation would likely be. Until Mina showed up at the tavern, I thought I had escaped their clutches. Seeing her made it clear their game wasn't over. After finishing my drink, I slipped out the back door, avoiding the front in case they were watching. Cutting through the empty lot behind the tavern, I circled around to my pickup. Just as I unlocked the door, a man approached me. "You're a hard man to find. Lucas John Frost, I presume," he said. "How do you know that name?" I asked, wary. "My name's Mark Collins. I'm married to your oldest daughter, Emma," he replied. "That could either be a blessing or a curse," I said dryly. "Does she act like her mother?" He smiled faintly. "Why I'm here has nothing to do with her. Some things need sorting out." "That would have been easier if your mother-in-law had just signed the divorce papers," I said. "What divorce papers?" Mark asked, clearly taken aback. "Follow me," I said. We drove through town and down a long driveway that led to a farmhouse. In my home office, I pulled out the divorce papers and let him make copies. Mark didn't need to know the house wasn't mine. I'd built it for the grand dame, hoping she'd eventually move there from her old home. Mark struck me as confident and well-educated, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that he was part of one of Lena and Nina's schemes. He connected to my Wi-Fi and downloaded files onto his laptop. As he worked, I noticed his expressions change. He was processing information that didn't match what he'd been told. At one point, he printed a letter from Lena's attorney to mine, acknowledging the agreed property division but refusing to finalize the divorce without an in-person meeting. "Do you think Emma knows the truth?" Mark asked. "That's something you'll need to ask her yourself," I replied. "But here's a question for you. Does Lena really have cancer?" "Who told you that?" Mark asked, frowning. "Nina and John told the bartender today. But I know it's a lie. Lena's perfectly fine. She's living in a common-law marriage with her former attorney and is pregnant with his second child." Mark sighed. "She's the one who sent me to find you. She claims the divorce needs to be finalized so she can remarry." He called Emma and put her on speakerphone so I could hear. "Did you know your mother lied about the divorce not being finalized?" he asked her. "What are you talking about?" Emma replied, confused. "Mom told us Dad abandoned us, drained everything, and disappeared. If it were for our stepdad, we wouldn't have made it. I'm sending you the legal file," Mark said. "Read it and call me back." While they talked, I grabbed 2 beers, popped the tops, and handed one to Mark. "Why didn't you tell Emma you found me?" I asked. Mark took a long sip. "Emma and I have only been married 2 years, and we just had a baby 3 months ago. For now, I'd rather keep this to myself. Everyone else thinks I'm working on an unrelated investigation." He pulled out a badge, confirming he was a police officer with the Paradise Police Department. I quickly checked their website and confirmed his identity. "So, what led you to me?" I asked. "It was an accident report from a few months ago," Mark explained. "Emma filed a missing persons report about you, and it eventually wound up in my hands. After cross-referencing with an insurance claim ruling in your favor, I followed the trail here." "And you still didn't tell Emma?" I pressed. "After reviewing your file, I realized something bigger was going on," he said. "For example, what happened to the $250,000 in cash Lena was supposed to get along with the house deed? And why is everyone lying about what really happened?" "Sounds like you've been fed as many lies as I have," I said just as his phone rang again. "It's my wife. Keep it down," Mark said, putting it on speaker. "Hi, honey," Emma said, her voice tense. "Where did you get all this? Is it true? Have we been lied to all these years? John doesn't even know who he really is, and neither do I. My sister Grace will lose it. She always defended Dad and stopped speaking to Mom because of it. This completely contradicts everything we were told growing up," Emma said, her voice filled with frustration. "Mom and Aunt Nina gave Dad no choice. They've been manipulating his life for years. And now I find out the divorce hasn't been finalized because Mom refuses to sign? What's really going on here?" "It's true," Mark confirmed. "I got the details from your father's lawyer's widow. I had to go out of state to track her down. Her husband kept duplicates of all the records, including the divorce petition, which it seems your mom was served with on the very day your dad left." I wrote a quick note for Mark to pass along to Emma. "Tell her to talk to her great-aunt Mabel. Assuming she's still alive," I said. Mark nodded thoughtfully. "It's crucial we find my father," Emma said, her voice resolute. "He deserves to finally be free from Mom and all her schemes. Why won't she finalize the divorce? And what happened to the money she got? If she owned the house outright, why did she have to sell it? And now I hear she's planning to sue Dad for desertion? None of this adds up." "I'll talk to Aunt Mabel," Mark said. "In the meantime, ask your sister to keep an eye on our son a bit longer. This needs to stay between us for now. It looks like there's serious fraud involved. Why has your mom been slandering your dad for all these years? I may need to loop in the district attorney. By the way, the $250,000 cash that your dad gave her seems to have disappeared after it passed through his lawyer's hands. Don't tell your sister yet. If the DA starts investigating, it's better to keep this quiet." I stood up and busied myself preparing some snacks, giving Mark privacy to finish his call. When he hung up, he asked, "Why do you want Emma to talk to Aunt Mabel?" "Mabel's the one who uncovered the truth about Lena and Henry's affair. I explained. She never married, but she practically raised the family like a mother. Having been a single mom herself, she saw through Nina and Lena's schemes early on. Mabel believed they conspired to manipulate both Henry and me, though I'm still not sure to what end. And if that's true, why? Mark asked. Mabel thinks their ultimate motive is still unclear. What I do know is that Mabel's granddaughter, Hannah, wants her to move in with her. But Mabel insists on staying put until the truth comes out. Hannah visits her often, bringing her two sons, but she's led a very private life. I think socializing with Lena and Nina took a toll on her. They've used people for as long as I've known them. Mark paused before asking, "Do you want to know about your kids before I leave?" "Not yet," I said firmly. "Not until I'm sure you are who you say you are. For all I know, this could be another part of their game. While you're at it, look into my lawyer's sudden death. If Lena plans to sue me, what makes her think she can win?" Mark's face turned pale as he absorbed what I was saying. Realizing what kind of people he had married into, he finally extended his hand, and we exchanged numbers. He promised to keep me updated. After shaking his hand and showing him out, I locked up and took a long, indirect route home to ensure I wasn't followed. The walk gave me time to think. My life had improved so much since leaving the past behind. Did I really want to dig it all up again? But knowing Lena and Nina, I knew I had to prepare. They'd go to any lengths for money. As soon as I stepped through the door, I was greeted by the best part of my life. Two little kids barreling toward me and hugging my legs. I scooped up my 3- and 4-year-olds, the apples of my eye, just like their mother. I felt incredibly blessed to have all 3 of them in my life. "Dinner's almost ready," Hannah called from the kitchen, her voice warm and familiar. I set the kids down and went to wash up. Over dinner, I told her about my day after closing the store. As I sat there with my family, I marveled at how far my life had come since I left paradise nearly 7 years ago. I had promised my grandmother, Mabel, that I would always keep in touch, and I had honored that promise. Every Sunday we'd talk, and about a year and a half ago, she had called me for help. Her granddaughter, Hannah, needed to escape a toxic marriage and start fresh. Hannah, 10 years younger than me, had no kids and lived on an army base out of state. I didn't know much about her, but I owed Mabel. Within a week, I found and partially furnished a 2-bedroom apartment for Hannah in a small town with the help of a friend. When I arrived to pick her up, she had already quit her job, emptied her bank account, and packed her bags. Her husband was away on his final 2-week training exercise before enlisting in the Army. Quietly, and with the help of a few friends, we loaded everything she wanted into a rented U-Haul. By midnight, we were on the road, gone before anyone could notice. For safety reasons, I refused to tell her where I was from. During the long drive, Hannah and I began to get to know each other. Late that night, she got a call from Mabel. I grinned as Hannah told her grandmother, "Yes, Grandma, Luke picked me up, but you could have warned me. He looks like a wild bushman who might clean up okay if he tried." The next day, Mabel contacted Hannah's attorney to forward all her legal documents to my FedEx mailbox. Hannah warned me that her soon-to-be ex-husband might cause trouble, so I took precautions to protect her. Hannah quickly took over managing my store and proved to be a natural. Her organizational skills, charm, and focus on customer needs brought in new clients and created a harmonious work environment. Her ex-husband, however, didn't go quietly. He was dishonorably discharged and returned to my old hometown, likely expecting Hannah to be there. Mabel had to secure a restraining order to keep him away from her. To avoid drawing attention, Hannah wore a diamond ring, which people assumed meant we were engaged. When asked about it, she'd say, "I'm sure you'll figure it out," sparking rumors of a mail-order bride. As time went on, Hannah and I grew closer. She often brought me lunch on Saturdays, a habit that helped me keep my energy up when I got too engrossed in work to eat. Her care and kindness came naturally, and over time, so did our relationship. Everyone in town assumed we were a couple, and honestly, they weren't wrong. Mabel kept me informed about what was happening back in paradise. It wasn't long before we learned that Hannah's ex had grown friendly with Nina. That news only deepened the bond between Hannah and me as we prepared for whatever came next. We celebrated our growing bond one evening at the local bar, surrounded by friends. Under the dim, warm lights, Hannah and I shared our first kiss during a slow dance. 6 months later, we took a big step, moving in together. That night, while the kids were playing in the bath, I decided it was time for a change. Shaving off my beard and mustache, I left only a shadow of stubble behind. The kids were transfixed as they watched. I lathered my face with the bowl and brush Hannah had given me for Christmas, playfully soaping up their faces too. Their laughter echoed through the bathroom. Hannah walked in, her expression a mix of surprise and amusement. "It looks like Daddy could look like you with a clean face," she teased, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Should I cut his hair too?" Both toddlers squealed. "Yes." I laughed. "I think I'll let the barber handle that on Monday." "No, I'll do it myself before you change your mind," Hannah insisted. She dried the kids off, got them into their pajamas, and settled them at the kitchen table to watch as she got to work. By the time she finished, I barely recognized the man staring back at me in the mirror. "You did a great job," I told her. She smiled and sent me to shower off the loose hair while she cleaned up the mess. As I rinsed off, Hannah's grandmother called to let her know Emma had just left her place. Hannah believed her grandmother was preparing to finally confront the family. Emma had discovered that the $600 per month annuities I had set up for each of my children had somehow never reached them. This revelation only added to the tangled mess of deceit surrounding Lena and Nina. The next week, I became the center of attention in town, mostly because of my new look. Friends and neighbors couldn't resist cracking jokes, asking Hannah if she'd blackmailed me into joining normal society. Hannah played along, laughing. He promised to bathe at least 3 times a week. Most got the joke, a few didn't. It was eye-opening to see how people's attitudes shifted when they thought someone had changed. But beneath the humor, trouble brewed. A local source informed me that I was being sued in civil court for child abandonment, desertion, and back child support. Hannah and I couldn't help but find it absurd, laughing at the idea of a collection agency trying to track me down. Even the mailman who delivered the news found it hilarious. The district attorney and the postmaster's office had hired an attorney on my behalf, using my situation as part of a broader investigation. Mark later estimated that Lena and Nina had stolen more than $48,000 from my children's annuities. They had also reopened the investigation into my former attorney's sudden death, now suspected to be linked to arson and manslaughter. The DA's office was piecing together a case that could result in Lena and Nina facing 7 to 10 years in prison. Lena's new partner, her common-law husband and former attorney, risked being disbarred if the allegations held up. The attorney hired to represent me instructed me to stay hidden to help strengthen the case. For a few weeks, Hannah and I enjoyed rare peace, but it didn't last. Mabel called one Sunday night to warn us that paperwork was being filed the next morning. She sent over years' worth of documents she had collected. Everything from notarized statements to videotaped conversations and the names of attorneys willing to support a countersuit. One detail caught my attention immediately: a $2 million accidental death insurance policy taken out 6 months before I left. The timing was suspicious. Hannah and I spent most of the night forwarding everything to the DA's office, convinced this was a setup to lure me back. The next morning, Hannah selected a recommended attorney and sent them the information with a retainer. By Friday, Lena and Nina were served with a countersuit. That same day, Hannah called me to let me know Mabel was on her way with guests. They left Thursday night and stayed at a hotel, but they'll be here soon, she said. We decided to close the store for the weekend and spend time with family. Around 7 p.m., we saw a Ford Explorer and an Escape pull into the driveway. 4 adults climbed out, and Hannah noticed my unease. She took my hand reassuringly. My truck was hidden in the garage, so no one knew I was there. "Who's that with Mabel?" Hannah asked. "That's Mark, his wife Emma holding their baby, and Grace, my second oldest daughter," I said. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. Hannah, holding our youngest, opened the front door. We all stepped out to greet them. Grace burst into tears the moment she saw me. I handed my son to Mabel and embraced Grace tightly. Emma passed her baby to Mark and joined us, her own emotions spilling over. My daughters had grown into beautiful young women, and seeing them together like this was unforgettable. Good to see you again, Mark, I said, shaking his hand. After introductions, Hannah served a lavish dinner. Beef shoulder, mashed potatoes with gravy, scones, Yorkshire pudding, string beans, and hot apple pie for dessert. Once the kids were settled for the evening, the adults sat down to talk. First off, Luke, Mark began cautiously. Is it okay if I call you Dad? I nodded. Of course. Thanks, Dad. The DA believes Hannah's ex-husband's car may have been involved in your lawyer's accident. They're running a paint comparison on the car's current owner. If it matches, your lawyer's death will lead to manslaughter charges, Mark explained. The fire that destroyed his office the same night is being treated as arson. They even have video footage of Hannah's ex in the background. Mark continued, since Lena and her attorney sealed the divorce papers, they think there are no documents to prove the property agreements. They've already filed a lawsuit against you this week. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I always thought you were being overprotective when you moved me here, but now I understand. All those questions you asked my grandmother. I see now why you needed to know exactly who we were dealing with. Mabel interjected. Noah and Nina must have realized I was in contact with you. That's why we came here so quickly. We were afraid they'd try to retaliate. Hannah turned to Mabel. Grandma, your house is ready. It's furnished and waiting for you. You'll only need to bring clothes. I packed most of what I need in the car, Mabel replied. Emma will ship the rest, including the antiques. I've given her power of attorney to sell the house and furniture. It's time to leave paradise for good. I'll drive back with Mark and Emma, I said. I'll rent a truck and haul everything out. Mark looked puzzled. What suspicions are we talking about? The lawsuit against me is just bait to lure me out, I explained. The $2 million accidental death insurance policy is the smoking gun. My former attorney's death, it was a test. Mark, Emma, Grace, and Mabel all went pale as the realization hit them. They were planning to kill you, Dad, Emma said softly. You knew, didn't you? Before you even left town. I had my suspicions, I replied with a wry smile. Even my lawyer didn't believe me at first, but in the end, he experienced the truth firsthand. Mark excused himself to make some important calls, giving my daughters, Hannah, and me time to catch up. Hannah pulled out some old photos of me from when we first met. Both Emma and Grace admitted they wouldn't have recognized me now, even if they passed me on the street. When Mark returned, the room fell silent. Lena will be taken into custody after the holiday, he said. We can hold her for 48 hours before formally charging her with 3 counts of theft for stealing from the children's annuities. That'll slow the process down and ensure she doesn't get a bond hearing right away. He turned to me. Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday, rent a U-Haul, and start visiting a few old places, we'll ensure people notice you're in town. Tell anyone who asks that you're packing up Mabel's things to help her move. This will force Lena to act. She'll have to communicate from jail. The district attorney confirmed your suspicions, Dad, Emma added. Police protection will be arranged for you at Mabel's house until this all gets resolved. Hannah narrowed her eyes at Mark. Are you seriously using my children's father as bait to lure out my cousins? What guarantee do I have that he won't end up in danger? I met Hannah's gaze, and she immediately understood. Damn it, she muttered. You'd do it without hesitation, wouldn't you? No matter what I think. Hannah always understood me better than I understood myself. Hannah, Luke's always been like that, Mabel said. It's why I called him to help you escape your ex. Luke never asks anyone to do what he wouldn't do himself. He's determined to get rid of Lena and Nina for good. Hannah tried to smile, but looked worried. My only fear is that he'll end up walking straight into danger. If Luke were a boxer, he'd be a world title holder, Mabel added with a laugh. He's quick on his feet and thinks 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Lena and Nina have no idea he's a step ahead. Relax, ladies, I said. I'll be in Mark's capable hands. Besides, if anything happens to me, he'll have to answer to Emma. Mark simply nodded, well aware of the risks involved in my return to paradise. Later that evening, while the women continued their conversation, Mark and I talked privately. The DA thinks Hannah's ex will make his move once he knows you're in town, Mark said. They'll be furious when he finds out you rescued Hannah from her abusive marriage. What happens if he's caught in the act? I asked. Would he confess to save himself? With his military background, he's always taken responsibility when caught, Mark explained. He's a follower, not a leader. Noah and Nina manipulate him because he's easily controlled, but I expect him to spill everything if cornered. As I drove into Paradise later that week, a large sign greeted me. Welcome to City of Refuge. Population 34,823. The sign's message reminded me of the town's peculiar reputation. Local laws often bent to the whims of those in power. Justice here was selective, favoring those who aligned with the town's elites while others were cast aside. It felt like stepping back into the Wild West, with a skewed sense of progressivism dictating life. The town hadn't changed much in nearly 7 years. The main street was freshly paved, but everything else looked exactly as I remembered it. My first stop was a familiar haunt, Bob and Betty's Burger Bar. To my surprise, it was still there, its facade freshly painted but otherwise unchanged. Pulling the U-Haul into the parking lot, I stepped out and walked through the entrance just before the lunch rush. I hoped to be recognized. I needed word of my return to spread quickly. As I sat down and picked up the menu, I noticed a few people glancing my way and discreetly using their phones. A server approached with a smile. "Ready to order?" she asked. "Is the Wednesday special of meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes still on?" I inquired. She looked surprised. "How do you know about that?" "It's not on the menu. It's for regulars." "Tell Sam that Luke wants brown gravy and fried onions on the meatloaf," I said. She stared at me like I was crazy. "Never mind," I added with a grin. "I'll tell him myself." Ignoring her protests, I walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen. Sam turned around and immediately smirked. "You dumbass," he said with a laugh. "You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend." Sam, the son of the original owner, hadn't changed a bit. He asked a staff member to bring my coffee into the kitchen so we could catch up. Over the next hour, we reminisced and talked about the town's changes. Eventually, Sam leaned in. "Luke, you should know my wife ended her friendship with Lena and Nina not long after you left. She couldn't stand what they were doing to you and the kids." "Sam, a lot is about to happen," I said, lowering my voice. "If all goes according to plan, this town is going to see some fireworks. Emma's husband, Mark, is working with me. That's why I'm back." Sam nodded, his face serious. "Mark's a damn good cop," he said. "He put 2 city council members in jail last year for corruption. But we'll talk more later. There are too many big ears around here." Just then, Sophia pulled into the parking lot. My little sister had grown up, but she still carried the same fire in her eyes. I stayed seated, knowing she'd recognize me the moment she walked in. When she spotted me, her expression shifted from shock to relief. "Sam, what's going on?" she asked, clearly flustered. "It's important," he said simply. When she finally came closer, I stood up and turned to her. Sophia froze for a moment before throwing her arms around me. I hugged her tightly, as though no time had passed. After a few minutes, she calmed down, and Sam ushered the kitchen staff out to give us privacy. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" Sophia asked, wiping her tears. "No," I said, "and let's keep it that way for a few days." "Are you here because Lena was taken into custody last night?" my sister asked as we walked out of the restaurant toward my rental truck. "Yes," I replied, "and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Once I settle in, I'll be under police protection." They've reopened the investigation into my former lawyer's death, suspecting it's connected to the arson that destroyed his office. Sam and Sophia exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions saying more than words could. It was no secret that the district attorney, appointed 3 years ago, had made it a priority to revisit cold cases and resolve long-standing mysteries. "You're being used as bait to draw someone out, aren't you?" Sam asked quietly. "If everything goes as expected, the arson, the insurance fraud, and several other crimes will be exposed in the next few days," I said. "This whole situation was orchestrated to force me back to the city. Lena's arrest and my sudden return are disrupting a carefully planned conspiracy." "What's behind all this?" Sam asked. "A $2 million insurance policy," I said flatly. "Double indemnity, payable on accidental death, and I'm the one it's insured on." Sophia's face hardened as she digested the information. "They insured you?" We continued chatting as we walked toward the truck. Suddenly, Sophia leaned in close and whispered, Nina just pulled up beside us. Where are you staying? At Mabel's old house, I replied. I'm moving her things to her new place. She wanted to be far away from whatever is about to happen. Why did Mabel leave town? Sophia asked. She wanted to be near Hannah and her boys, I said with a smile. Hannah and I have been together for over 5 years now, and we have 2 sons, 3 and 4 years old. Sophia stopped in her tracks, clearly shocked. Wait, how did you and Hannah end up together? Mabel and I stayed in touch all these years, I explained. When Hannah needed help leaving her marriage, her grandmother called me. I helped her move, and we've been together ever since. We believe her ex was responsible for my lawyer's death and the fire at his office. Do Lena and Nina know you're aware of what they've been doing? Sophia asked. Not yet, I said. But they'll find out soon enough once they start making their moves. At that moment, Nina approached us, her expression tense. Luke, I need you to drop part of your lawsuit against us, she demanded. The district attorney plans to charge Lena within 48 hours. Unfortunately, my attorney says we can't do that. I replied evenly. Lena filed a new divorce petition claiming desertion, child abandonment, and back child support. Until the court rules on her claims, nothing can change. You can't do that, Nina protested. How are we supposed to bail her out if everything is frozen? Maybe your father could put his house up as collateral, I suggested with a shrug. After all, you're both his daughters. Nina's face darkened and she turned away, visibly frustrated. Sophia watched her go and said quietly, their father wants nothing to do with them. Not since he found out about John's real parentage. He says they're just like their mother. That brought a smile to my face. Finished with the conversation, I got into the U-Haul and headed to Mabel's house, stopping to pick up packing supplies on the way. 3 hours later, I backed the truck into the driveway, carefully using the mirrors to park close to the garage. Once I stepped outside, I locked the truck and entered the house. Something felt off. Mabel had mentioned leaving the curtains open, but they were now drawn. I texted Mark to ask if the police had closed them, and he replied that officers stationed at the house might have done it. Feeling cautious, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. A police officer greeted me immediately, handing me his cell phone. Mark Collins wants to speak with you, he said. Hi Mark, I said. Looks like the right people know I'm here. Nina confronted me at the burger place earlier, asking me to lift the lien on Lena's assets. I refuse. We expected that, Mark said. We've been recording Lena and Nina discussing their plans. Hannah's ex, Brad Stone, came up several times. Lena instructed Nina to inform Brad that you know where Hannah is. That should provoke him into making a move. Our hunch was right, Mark continued. Brad showed up within an hour of learning you were back. Lena told him you were staying at Mabel's house. He'll act soon. As Mark explained the situation, I got to work unloading cardboard boxes from the truck and started packing up the house. Around 6:30 p.m., a delivery driver arrived with pizza from Papa John's. When he asked if I was moving, I replied casually, no, just helping a friend. Later that night, just before 11 p.m., Brad made his move. Using a tire iron, he picked the lock on the front door and crept inside. Seeing the light on in the kitchen, he drew a pistol from under his shirt and headed toward it. He found me sitting at the table, sipping coffee. Hey Luke, Brad said with a menacing grin. Lena and Nina send their regards. I'm here to find out where Hannah is. Sorry, I said coolly. I'm not about to tell my lawyer's killer or the guy who burned his office anything. Brad's smirk faltered. What makes you think I did that? He asked, taking the bait. Because you're the type they'd manipulate into doing their dirty work, I said. So tell me, how much of the $4 million accidental death payout did they promise you? $4 million? Brad's face went pale. They told me it was $750,000. I couldn't help but laugh. Did you know John isn't even Lena's child? He's Nina's son from her first marriage. They've been using and manipulating people for years, Brad, including you. Do you really think they have your best interests at heart? Brad's expression shifted as realization dawned. I'm screwed either way, he muttered. You're right about that, I said. The fact that my lawyer's car accidentally hit a tree at 70 miles per hour makes this manslaughter. And when the truth comes out, you're just another expendable pawn in their game. Brad stared at me, visibly shaken, as the weight of his situation sank in. Manslaughter would ruin me, Brad muttered, the weight of realization heavy in his voice. You'd be looking at 5 to 10 years for manslaughter. I replied calmly, but liquidation? That's life. And once I'm dead, they can spin it however they want. Claim you acted in a fit of rage over Hannah. They'd paint you as an unstable scapegoat who didn't know what he was doing. Ask yourself, did they set you up as a fall guy? Brad stared at me, his hands trembling. I pressed on. Most accidental death policies don't pay out for liquidation. If you were me, what would you do? I'd make a deal, Brad admitted hesitantly. Exactly, I said. Turn state's evidence. Cooperate with the authorities. If you help them, they might take your cooperation into account. It's the only way you can get revenge on the people who were planning to get rid of you once you'd served your purpose. Brad slowly placed the gun on the table and looked me in the eye. Call the police, he said. You can tell them yourself, I replied, gesturing behind him. They're already here. Brad turned to find 2 undercover officers standing silently behind him, weapons drawn. He raised his hands in surrender. Meanwhile, Emma watched her husband pace the bedroom, his phone pressed to his ear. Mark had woken her with a late-night call, and she busied herself putting the kettle on to make hot chocolate for them both. When Mark finally ended the call, a smile broke across his face. Your father surprised us all tonight, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. He talked Brad down, got him to confess to everything, and essentially turned him into our star witness. The whole thing was caught on video by the undercover cops. Emma froze. How did my father do that? Mark chuckled. He told Brad things he didn't know, like the truth about John's origins. And he convinced Brad that the insurance policy wouldn't pay out for liquidation. That doubt was enough to make Brad take the lesser consequences over life without parole. Your dad outsmarted everyone. Mabel always said my dad was a quick thinker, Emma murmured. But even she didn't see this coming. What does this mean for my mom and Mina? Mark's tone turned serious. If Brad testifies in court, your mom and Mina will face charges for arson, manslaughter, and at least attempted liquidation of your father. Emma grabbed her phone and called Hannah. They quickly devised a plan. Mabel would watch the kids while Hannah flew out to join Emma. Hannah would text her arrival time, and they'd meet at the airport. By the time Emma explained everything to her sister, Mark was already dressed and on his way to the station to get Brad's signed statement. I didn't wake until 8 a.m. the next morning. The first thing I did was call Sam to get the front door fixed. Within half an hour, someone was there replacing the door, installing new trim, and putting in a sturdier lock. As the handyman finished, Emma pulled into the driveway with Hannah. The moment Hannah saw me, she jumped out of the car and ran to me, tears streaming down her face. I held her tightly, realizing just how much she had been through. Brad turned himself in last night, I said softly. He surrendered to the police to protect me. I was never in any real danger. If that's true, Hannah said, pulling back to look at me. Why didn't you call me? Why did I have to hear about it from Emma? It was almost 2 in the morning when the police cleared out. I admitted, I planned to call you today. I wrapped my arm around her and pulled her close. I promise I'll never put myself in that kind of danger again. Once the repairman left, we locked up, put Hannah's luggage away, and headed to my brother's restaurant for breakfast. There, we were met by Grace, Sophia, and my parents. Sam's staff had to rearrange tables to seat everyone. Hannah was warmly welcomed by the family, and breakfast was exceptional. Sam was so excited about the recent events that we practically inhaled the food. My parents were thrilled to learn about our sons, Carson and Hunter, named after my grandfathers. They eagerly flipped through the photos of our family that Hannah had saved on her phone. My daughters opened up, sharing how they had found me with Mabel and how much they'd learned since reconnecting with me. The room buzzed with energy and laughter as we caught up on years of stories. Mark joined us later, looking tired but determined. Lena and Mina are in custody now, he announced. Brad has confessed to everything, including his original plan to eliminate his father. They'll be charged with arson and manslaughter once he testifies in court. Lena and Nina are facing 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit liquidation, and multiple fraud charges. Mark turned to Hannah with a smile. The district attorney has already met with the divorce judge. He's petitioning to expedite finalizing Luke's divorce. Are you saying Luke and I can finally get married? Hannah asked, her voice catching with emotion. The DA took the papers and Luke's original divorce documents to the judge, Mark explained. The hope is that the judge will waive Lena's signature requirement, the waiting period, and issue the divorce certificate. I looked at Hannah, a grin spreading across my face. I think it's time I buy you a proper engagement ring and finally propose. The room erupted in murmurs and smiles. Tears welled up in Hannah's eyes. Though she had always believed we would eventually marry, this moment felt surreal. Before we left, my parents made us promise to come over for dinner. Hannah and I spent the afternoon packing until about 5:30 p.m., then headed to my parents' house. Over dinner, Mom and Dad asked a flurry of questions. Hannah shared how I had helped her escape her failed marriage, crediting her grandmother for bringing us together. She recounted how she got her first job and where it had led her. The warmth of family and love filled the room as we prepared for the next chapter of our lives together. We were still basking in the warmth of family when Mark and Emma walked in, holding something that immediately caught my attention: my divorce certificate. After all these years, I was officially free. It felt like a weight had been lifted, a moment I hadn't dared to fully anticipate. While Hannah chatted with my mother, proudly sharing stories about our children and the life we'd built together, my mom made an announcement. "You two should have a wedding before heading back. There's no reason to wait," she said with a twinkle in her eye. My father, always quick to seize an opportunity, grabbed Mark and me, handing us each a glass of fresh beer. "Let's talk," he said, leading us to the den. It was the only way to escape the lively chatter in the living room. Once inside, my dad's tone shifted. When word got out that Nina was arrested, the calls started pouring in. People are coming forward with all sorts of information. Turns out we've only been scratching the surface of what Nina and Lena have been involved in. Half the DA staff is now tied up sorting through the mess. Any idea what happens to Noah, Lena's common-law husband? I asked, more curious than concerned. How involved was he in all of this? Mark shook his head. Nothing connects him directly to the twins' crimes, so he's safe legally. But disbarment is almost certain. They'll be stuck raising their kids, though, which might be punishment enough. Has Aunt Mabel been told everything? Emma asked. Before anyone could answer, Hannah's dad called out from the other room, playfully saying, "By the way, Hannah wears a size 6.5 ring, in case anyone's curious." Mark and I exchanged amused glances. "Let's go," he said. A few minutes later, we were at the mall. Mark picked out a gift for Emma, and I chose a stunning 3-ring engagement set that I knew Hannah would love. When we got back, no one even noticed we'd slipped out. Later, as I was on the phone with Mabel, Grace arrived with her boyfriend. The house was now packed, so we all moved to the living room, the men hauling chairs in from the kitchen to accommodate everyone. My dad made Hannah sit in his chair, which immediately tipped my mom off that something was up. She watched the scene unfold with laser focus. The room grew quiet as I walked over to Hannah, kneeling in front of her. "Noah, you do me the honor of legally becoming my wife?" I asked. She was caught completely off guard, her eyes widening in surprise before she broke into a radiant smile. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Cheers erupted around us, and the evening turned into a spontaneous celebration. My father raised his glass. "I got almost 7 years of drinking to catch up on with my son," he announced. "Hannah and Luke, your engagement is the best excuse to start." Mark ended up driving Hannah and me back to Mabel's that night, both of us finally starting to feel the stress and worry melt away. The next morning, Hannah and I went to City Hall to pick up our marriage license. While we were there, Hannah discovered she could fit into Emma's wedding dress, which saved us time and hassle. Sam agreed to be my best man, while Grace proudly stepped up as Hannah's maid of honor. Even the DA offered to officiate the ceremony, adding a meaningful touch to the day. I had to buy a suit at Macy's because, as Hannah made clear, there was no way I was marrying her in blue jeans. On Sunday afternoon, surrounded by our entire family in my parents' backyard, we exchanged vows. It was a simple but deeply moving ceremony. Everyone watched with admiration, even the twins' father, who had come despite everything. When the ceremony ended, my former father-in-law approached me with an envelope. "Philip, "This isn't a wedding gift," he said with a knowing smile. "It's an early inheritance. The rest of my estate will go to your daughters." I slipped the envelope into my suit pocket, not thinking much of it at the time. The day was about celebrating, not financial matters. Family members took videos of the ceremony and sent them to Aunt Mabel, ensuring she felt included despite the distance. During the reception, someone asked Hannah where we'd be going for our honeymoon. She didn't miss a beat. "After everything we've been through, once Grandma has settled in her new house, we're spending a week in Florida and another in California, taking the kids to Disney. Because without family, we wouldn't be where we are today." The next day, as we prepared to leave, I handed Hannah an envelope I had saved for this moment. Inside was a bank promissory note for $100,000, along with a note that read, "Thank you for helping to fix karma. I've always believed the twins liquidated their own mother. I will enjoy watching them get the justice they deserve for their deeds, and so will my granddaughters." Hannah read the note quietly, then tucked it into her purse without a word. She didn't need to say anything. Her expression said it all. After hugging our daughters and parents goodbye, Hannah and I climbed into the U-Haul. As we drove home, the weight of the past finally lifted, leaving us free to focus on the future.